Welcome to CTN's Happy Tales. I'm your host, Melissa Bondi. This show focuses on animal rescues, organizations, and individuals who volunteer their time helping and assisting animals in many different capacities. On today's show, I'd like to welcome from the Leslie Science and Nature Center, Lannis Smith. She is the program manager. And Lannis has also brought along a few friends who we will meet very shortly. The Leslie Science and Nature Center's mission is to create moments of discovery that inspire curiosity, exploration, and respect for the STEM and the natural world. Welcome to the show, Lannis.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
You're very welcome. It's been a long time. I know that you're a staple. The Leslie Science and Nature here in Ann Arbor, 32 years, you said.
Yeah, at least.
Yeah, so I apologize for not having you on sooner, but you're here.
It's okay. We're glad to be here today.
Good, wonderful. So tell us then, real briefly, about the Science and Nature Center and how it came to be.
Absolutely. So long story short, the Leslie Science and Nature Center is kind of like a city park and an educational center. Our land that we are on now is owned by the city and was actually donated to the city by the Leslie family, Dr. Eugene and Emily Leslie. Now they owned about 200 acres of land, and when they donated all that to the city, they ended up dividing it into basically sections where people could utilize the land differently, but in a natural setting. So there's a Leslie Park golf course right next door. There's Leslie Park, appropriately named, right behind us, and then there's the Leslie Science and Nature Center. Now the grounds are actually open all day, every day for free. Folks can come in and use it like they would for any city park. You can have a picnic lunch there. You can bring in your hammocks. You have wooded trails you can walk through. And then from our organization, we actually have some of our wildlife that lives outside all year round that folks can come and visit. We also partner with the Ann Arbor Hands-On Museum, and we do a variety of educational programs off our property at schools, libraries, other Ann Arbor fairs and festivals, but we encompass all of Michigan and beyond for different programs.
For programs, oh my gosh, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot, and a lot of driving.
And a lot of driving, sure. Right, because you're probably very sought after, because it's a very unique organization and what you do.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
I found it really interesting. So on a Saturday morning, if I'm looking for something to do, and I just, it's a nice day and I want to get out, I can come to the Science Center.
Absolutely.
It's not Science Center, the Nature Center, and visit for free and just hang out and just relax and just see what's...
Yeah, for sure. So when you come and visit, you'll notice there's a fair amount of buildings that are on the property. There are maps that folks can use to either browse what we might call the main campus, but there's also wooded trails. Now, we utilize the buildings for a lot of either private events, school programs, rentals, and more. There's a couple of fire pits that folks might rent out. But you can really think of it, if anything you see outside is open for folks to visit. So we have about a couple miles or so of wooded trails that folks can walk through. The big feature out there is there's a seasonal pond with a floating bridge up top that you can go out, look out and see some of the native wildlife that are out there. And then from us, some of our educational animals live outside, primarily our birds of prey. So you can see hawks, owls, eagle, falcons, and they live outside all year round. So we have a lot of folks that will come in after a long day of work and they'll walk through what we call our Raptor Loop. Sometimes the cross-country team will come and run through our trails. We have folks that do mountain biking through there, and many people that just visit to have kind of a relaxing afternoon outdoors.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's very peaceful. A good little escape from the city, I like to think of it as.
Right, and you're located northern Ann Arbor.
Yeah, we're just outside of the city. If people know the university at all, you can kind of think of us being right by North Campus along Plymouth Road or so.
Okay. And we were talking about some of the animals that you do house or do live or come back and whatnot. And but there's animals that you don't have.
Correct.
Such as, I know we talked about mammals.
Yeah, so we don't do any rescue or rehabilitation on our property. So a lot of the animals that we have, we've either come by through working with other organizations that do rescue and rehab, and either saw those animals as an education potential. Some of our animals were people's pets and they just weren't able to take care of them anymore. Some of them were taken from the wild and then they were found and they had to go to some new space. And so from there, a lot of the animals, while we don't necessarily have one specific set we always look for, they just end up coming to us through a variety of stories. So most of our animals are actually reptiles and amphibians. We do have our birds of prey. And then just recently we actually have bats bats that live on our property too. All that we try to utilize in a different way for different educational programs to better justify their being in captivity, since ultimately being a wild animal, we actually want them out in the wild.
Right. Yeah. So is this, so we have volunteers that come,
Yeah.
we have a staff member here who's a longtime volunteer as well. What's the training like, real quick? What's the training like if I want to be a volunteer?
Yeah, which you should.
I should. It sounds very fun.
Yeah, we have a wildlife husbandry manager and kind of what you might call a wildlife team. And what people can do is they can go on our website, and the volunteer application's actually on our website. Okay. You can specify if you maybe have had experience in the past, or even if you don't, we still allow folks to help out with a variety of animal care tasks. Okay. And just to note is that most of our basic animal care is actually done by volunteers. Okay. We have folks that help feed our birds of prey, taking care of the reptiles and amphibians. There's a lot of cleaning and maintenance that's involved, especially because these animals being in an enclosed space, they don't have the freedom to move around to a lot of different areas. Or we do our best to 100% mimic nature, but it's almost impossible, so we try to do the best we can. But we have a great volunteer base that not only has a passion for animals, but also is always looking to learn more about them. And so how the training works is we usually give folks a tour of the site. We talk to them about our philosophies and our ethics working with wildlife, the opportunities that are there with the different animals they can take care of. And then from there, we actually set up trainings with that volunteer, usually with our wildlife husbandry manager, and they go through the process of taking care of those animals. So that way no one ever feels like they're just going in blind. We make sure that they feel comfortable doing those activities independently. And then it doesn't stop there. So if they have learned one thing, but they're really curious about this other animal, we can transition them to doing that task instead. And so it gives people kind of the variety to learn not only about the care, but understand these animals as a whole, or as a wild animal too. So
that's, wow.
It's a lot.
No, it's a lot, but it sounds like the opportunities is amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot of
give
fun.
me an example real quick of something that Alicia does as a is she a handler? What is her title?
Great
what
question.
Is she as a volunteer?
So Alicia May, who works in the studio, she's been helping out and volunteering with our Raptor Care for, gosh, I want to say at least 7 years. She's been a really hardcore, dedicated volunteer. And she's done a whole variety of things. Right now, she's actually helping feed our raptors. And that's probably our most strict task, because there's a very certain set of time in the day when you can do it. You have to be comfortable working with raw meat and animals that aren't no longer alive, because they're all carnivores. So we feed them a variety of rats, mice, and chicks. And then you have to be comfortable with those predators, because you are watching their wild instincts kind of come out. You visit the birds during the day, they're pretty relaxed, they're used to a lot of exposure of different humans visiting the site. But when you have food involved, I mean, those wild instincts kick into high gear. And you have these predators with these giant talons and these beaks. And so there's a protocol that we follow for each of those birds. And so for Alicia, for example, she's learned the behavior of those birds all those years, and has really got an idea of how to not only properly feed them, but also to tell if there's any kind of stress or something might be wrong with those animals. One of the things, too, that we help or rely on with some of our volunteers is to note different behaviors that might seem unusual, because animals don't just tell you when they're not feeling well or if they need something. And so a lot of our volunteers get to learn what those signs are to make sure we can really properly attend to those needs, or just make sure that they have the best care that they can get.
Can you give me an example of a reptile or in distress? Like, what would they do?
That's a great question, because it's hard to think of like a reptile looking sick.
What does it? What does it do?
So sometimes we can use whether or not they're eating as an example. For, let's say, a lizard, for example, we'll feed them just about every day, and many of them are omnivores, so they'll eat a variety of insects and greens. And let's say they choose not to eat the insect portion that's high in protein, high in fat, something an animal should really love to eat. Sometimes we can notice maybe if they're not using the restroom as much as they should, or things might look discolored. Behavior being that maybe they're lethargic, they're not very active, or they're active at the wrong times during the day. All of those can be signs that maybe something just isn't right, maybe they're getting old, or just good to check in on and see if there's something we can change in their environment to make them less stressed or feel better.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, I'm no reptile expert, so I'm sure there's other science too.
Sure.
But
no,
I get privilege to learn every day about those things.
That's amazing. That's a good example. Thank you.
You're
Yeah. Well,
welcome.
you know what? We brought some. You
did.
brought some animals today.
Yes, I did.
So let's start the show.
Get the ball rolling. Okay,
yeah.
great.
Who do we have first?
So we're actually going to bring out a reptile first,
Okay.
and this first reptile is native to Michigan. We try to make sure that we talk a lot about our native species here because Michigan has so much diversity when it comes to our wildlife. So let's see if I can find this guy. He can sometimes be a burrowing species, but we'll go ahead and we'll bring this guy out first.
Okay.
And so what I have with me is a fox snake, and usually the first thing people think about when they see the snake is rattlesnake. Now, don't get me wrong, we have some species in Michigan that look a lot like rattlesnakes. We even have a rattlesnake in Michigan. But you can note it, even though his tail is tiny, he doesn't actually have a rattler on his tail. But that's a great defense mechanism for this animal because he can actually shake his tail like he has a rattle and maybe sometimes trick whether a large predator like a human or another animal nearby into thinking he's a rattlesnake and makes him look more intimidating. But fox snakes are really unique too in that they're excellent swimmers and excellent climbers. So where we find this animal, we actually find him in a lot of our wetland regions. And in Michigan, we're pretty lucky. We have a lot of different aquatic habitats that can house or give the appropriate resources to these kinds of creatures.
Okay.
Yeah. Other things to think about too is it's weird to think that we have a lot of cold-blooded animals or ectotherms if you want to be really fancy in Michigan, but it's just because we have unique animals that have learned how to survive in our winters. You would think an animal that can't make itself warm wouldn't do well in our winter temperatures, but these guys do hibernate. We actually use this animal in one of our winter programs to talk about hibernation and how sometimes reptiles will actually be together in groups in what we call a hibernacula. And sometimes you can find up to 50 to hundreds of these snakes all in one burrow in the winter, partially to keep themselves warm. And then also, I know it's kind of funny to think of like a giant den of snakes all hanging out and sleeping in a way together. But from there too, that also helps because then in the spring, they're all there in one section, and spring is usually the mating season for snakes, so it's a little easier to find a potential mate when spring hits. Now, fox snakes, they'll get to be a lot bigger than this. This one's only about a few years old. Yep. Usually they can be about 3.5 to 5 feet long once they're fully grown. And they also turn this kind of copper color too. They have a very orangish tint that goes from their face all throughout their body. So the light tan that you're seeing right now between those dark spots will actually turn more of a yellow orangish tint too.
Okay.
Yeah. We also use snakes or reptiles in a lot of our programs, not only to talk about reptile classification or cold-blooded animals, but also to talk about adaptations. And so probably one of the signature things people look at when they look at a snake is its tongue. And you can see right now, while his tongue is kind of tiny, he's kind of sticking it out in little bits. And with that, snakes, they kind of sense their environment using their tongue. In layman's terms, we call that he's smelling you. And that right now, he's taking his tongue and he's tasting the air with his tongue. And then inside their mouth, there is an organ that actually kind of processes those tastes via like a sense of smell. So he has a nose he uses to breathe. I always like to make the joke that he's smelling you with his tongue, and because humans smell so funny, he's going to keep doing it. But from there, one of the things that people always notice when they're classifying snakes or finding them is they look to see how they're using their tongue. That's now, also something we can use for their behavior too.
Is this one of the animals that we can touch? We as in when you go out and do programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of our snakes, yes, you actually can touch. And that's good to note because this guy is one of the animals that we can. Most of the animals we don't actually allow folks to touch. And what goes on is any animal that we either have folks touch, actually any animal we bring to a program, they have to go through a really intense amount of training to just first learn how to be handled by a human. We're big scary predators to a lot of these animals, so they have to learn to feel safe. And then I, as a person, have to know how to handle them appropriately. So the entire time they are in my hand, being touched by a different human, and then being transported, that they feel safe the whole time. You might notice with this animal that I keep my hands open the whole time. And that's so I don't actually grab them or squeeze any part of their body like a predator would. And then if somebody touches the animal, I'll actually do the whole spiel with you. Are you ready? So we always tell folks to touch our animals in the same spot, since that way that animal. It's okay. Nope. You can keep them right in my hands. You're gonna take one finger like this, and you're just gonna run it along these dark scales up on the top. There you go. Perfect. And we always ask for folks to be gentle in touching them in the same spot, because this animal, the handling training or part of it is to learn I get touched in this portion of my body, and that if I feel safe, I know that's a good experience. And so anytime we take this animal in a program, we don't have them touch their belly, we don't have them touch their face or their tail. It's always the same spot, so the animal always gets the same positive experience.
Wonderful. Okay, Lannis. Well, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Let's see who else you brought.
This next one is a fun one.
Maybe after the show, I'll touch him. Touch it more.
That's okay.
I don't know about it right now.
We'll never force anybody to touch an animal.
No, of course
We'll
not.
never force anyone to like an animal even. We just want folks to appreciate them in the best way that they can. This animal is another great example for that too, because this animal does bring out some interesting reactions for folks. But that's kind of one of the reasons why we bring it out. Now, I have a prop too that I love to use for this animal.
And this is one that we don't touch unless we've been properly trained.
Correct.
For good reason.
Now, a lot of it, usually I let folks, take a minute to react because she's bigger than most of the ones we find here.
And this is
This is called a Mexican red knee tarantula.
Okay.
But we really use her to talk about spiders in general.
Okay.
One of the things about non-native animals. Yeah, right? She's fun. She walks quite a bit, so it's kind of cool to watch and see what she does. With non-native animals that we bring in our programs, the goal of it is for folks to still get that exposure to this kind of animal. Also, I mean, she's a little bit larger than some of the spiders that live here, so you can see the spider anatomy better. And then we can still talk about those animal adaptations just by using a larger or easier to see example. We still use her to talk about the native spiders that live here and their importance. They're excellent insect hunters. The spiders that are native to Michigan are great at catching mosquitoes. People put spiders in their kitchen on purpose to get rid of fruit flies and ants. And she's just kind of an impressive animal to watch. There's not a lot of folks that I have met, unless they've either had a tarantula as a pet or have met someone who has, that have actually seen a tarantula up close.
Really?
And don't get me wrong, there's sometimes a fear factor behind it too, and I understand that we kind of set ourselves up for that as humans. We have a lot of stories or books that have spiders as evil characters or antagonists. And so one of our other goals with this animal is to show people that they don't actually have to be afraid of spiders, that we can learn to appreciate them, and that they're actually more afraid of us than we are of them. So she's pretty cool. Now, what I love to use her for is because of the prop that I have today. Now, what you're noticing beyond her walking is you're probably noticing a lot of her coloration. She's a pretty hairy spider, and she uses those hairs for a couple of different reasons. But spiders, like insects, they actually have their bones on the outside of their body. And what's really neat is that usually when you think of how an animal might have to grow with their bones on the outside, is their bones don't actually grow with them. And so when this animal gets too big, she has to basically walk out of her old bones. And I actually have her old, what you might call molt or skeleton.
So that's what you brought that I thought was alive at the time.
A lot of people think that this is a real spider when they see it. You can actually see all 8 legs. You can see the hairs, the colors. Sometimes I'll actually pass it towards you so you can look. You can see even their teeth sometimes, that they shed the outer portion of tooth.
And this is from
this
her
one. And sometimes if you take a really close comparison, you can see that looks a little smaller than her. That's because it's her old or most recent molt. I can grab that back from you too. And what's great is that it's very fragile. And so it shows you just the fragility of this animal as a whole. This animal is maybe as light as a pencil, and so I have to be very gentle with her when I handle her.
So I was just gonna, so if you were to put this on the ground, which you're not, if you were to put this on the ground, would she just, how fast? What's the speed?
Gosh,
like how fast?
I mean, maybe a couple miles an hour, not very fast.
She like, would it just like,
it would look really fast because she can do
we
it
see them in
spurt
cages
bursts.
and they're climbing and they're down there.
Now,
I've never seen it.
Don't get me wrong, she's quick for what it looks like compared to other animals. She's not very fast. But spiders, if they have to move and move quickly, they do it in really short bursts. And that's mostly to be able to escape something like a predator or to find a dark space. From there, though, you're noticing that she's not moving too fast on my hand. It's that same idea with the snake. She actually has little sensors on her toes, though, that kind of act like taste buds. And so in a way right now, she's walking, she's tasting my hand with her feet. Kind of a weird phenomenon for animals, but part of the spider training, as you will, is that she learns my hands. So she learns that, oh, okay, this is Lannis's hand. I've been on this hand much of the time before, and she's relaxed. If anyone learns how to handle the spider, usually what we do is we'll keep her in her enclosure that she knows, and we'll have them put their hand flat on the bottom, and we'll just let her walk over her hand.
Okay. So is this part of, so if I were to go through training and wanted to be a volunteer, this is part of what I would learn and how to handle, like if I said I really want to know about spiders.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay.
Not all of our animals actually can be handled by volunteers. Usually it's because just of the time that it takes. There are some animals that folks learn how to handle just for care purposes. Okay. However, for volunteers that have either been at our center for a long time or have a big interest in education, there are some instances where we'll allow folks to learn how to use some of our more common education animals. Okay. Not only so they get that experience, but if they're curious about education, they can come help at public programs or fairs and festivals that we do too. Okay. For this animal, it's mostly the feeding and cleaning of her enclosure, which is still kind of cool because you get to watch her see how she eats. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, let's see. We've got another guest that you
brought
on.
We have so many that we brought today.
Yeah,
for sure. I'll go ahead and stick her back in. She's doing a great job today. Hopefully, we've helped some folks get over their fear of spiders by the encounter.
It doesn't seem so bad when you're holding it.
I'm
like, well.
And she's pretty relaxed, and she's pretty consistent in how she moves.
Kind of amazing. Yeah.
Our final creatures in here. And so this guy will only have out for just a short period of time.
Okay,
Oops, there goes my microphone. But from there, this animal's relatively new to the education set. Okay. And this animal is another one that's not native to Michigan. But what we love about this creature is where it lives has a very important job. And so from there, we can talk really on a global perspective about how these animals can help not only other wildlife around them, but say other plants and animals, even forests. Now, I have one of this creature. We're going to take our time getting him out so he feels relaxed. But usually when you see this animal out in the wild, you'll see them by the thousands. And that's actually because they're great migrators. So we'll go ahead and let this guy hang out with us today.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Now, the first thing you're probably noticing is, oh, it's a bat. This bat's going to stay with me, and like I said, we'll let him get a little comfortable out here, and then we'll go ahead and put him back. Yeah. Well, too, and it's funny, people watch them shaking, and it's not actually a nervous thing. No. It's because they're breathing so fast, and their heart rate is so fast, too, that their bodies actually physically move. It's like if you were trying to move your belly a bunch if you were breathing really fast. Sure. This is called a straw-colored fruit bat. They're an African species, also known as a megabat. You can see some of the big features on his head.
Eyes,
big eyes, those big cone-shaped ears. A great nocturnal creature, really large wings for them too, and a long snout, which usually tells you he's a fruit eater or eats nectar as well. Now, what's great about that is these guys, they're excellent at dispersing seeds and pollinating plants where they find them. In the rainforest or the jungle areas that we tend to see them, they'll usually migrate in October through December, but they'll migrate by the thousands. And the cool thing is if you have thousands of bats eating fruit, and let's say they accidentally eat a seed, they'll either spit that seed out or they'll use the restroom when it comes out on that end. But they also provide a lot of fertilizer, well, through their waste, and so they're basically planting seeds as they go along, eating different varieties of fruit. And since they can move so easily because they can fly, they basically are spreading these seeds through a vast area of land, and they're kind of building rainforests that way too. There are some spaces that are made purely because bats have just paroled through there. And so fruit bats on a global perspective are incredibly important. They're kind of like bees of the rainforest, pollinating a variety of plants that other animals might be housed in, or other animals might look for that fruit that's there too, all while being able to travel long distances and spread those seeds out as well. So really fascinating creatures like that too. Now, we have bats that live in Michigan. We have about 9 native species. They're not fruit bats, they're all insect bats, but they're kind of the insect control out in the wild, right? We hear that one bat can eat like thousands of insects in one night too. And so bats themselves, when you look at them, they kind of each have their own job based on where you find them.
Oh yeah, we had them at our house.
Yep, that definitely happens.
We had them in our attic.
We get a lot of stories about bats hanging out in people's houses. We make really good caves with our attics, so I can't deny that for sure. Yeah.
Well, we'll put him back. Yeah, I think
he's doing really well today.
He's doing well. Good.
Usually sometimes.
That's amazing.
Yeah, right? With this guy, same thing with all of our other animals. We'll look at different signs of stress or comfort too. With mammals,
But this
sometimes
one
it's a little easier.
he wasn't stressing out.
No,
like you may have thought.
something I'll notice is like if they look like they want to move, they might climb a little bit, or they might stretch their wings out. If they're sitting there and they're just kind of taking the environment in, that's
Yeah.
usually a good sign for them too.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Neat.
we're still learning about them too, so
Sure.
I'm sure there's other behaviors that I can't wait to learn about to see if I can find them, since we've only had them for a little over a year. To this day, any BAT program I do, I always learn something new.
How many do you have, or rough?
Yeah, we have about 18, I believe, or so on our property, both native and non-native species too, that we also have been trying to use in a variety of educational programs.
Yeah, and it sounds like, I mean, you're fantastic at it, so it sounds like you definitely know.
As I mentioned before, I talk a
animal.
lot, so it helps.
Well, yeah, and then repetitive of doing the programs.
Yeah, I
So-
never get bored though.
That's amazing. I love it.
Thank you.
Where are tell me a little bit about some of the outreach real quickly. Like I know we mentioned birthday parties.
Yes, for sure. So we actually do a lot of great programs off-site. For example, we can actually bring a birthday party to you or to your house. We do a lot of animal presentations when it comes to birthdays. But throughout the school year, and actually into the summer, we do a lot of programs where we can come to you, either with certain animals or say there's a certain concept you have in your curriculum. We do a lot of programs that revolve around natural concepts like life cycles, or sometimes we have an insect-specific program, food chains, animal adaptations, but also we can customize programs based on a certain unit that you might have in mind. We do have some where we have just a plant-focused one where there aren't any animals. We also do a variety of larger public programs for parties, or if someone's holding a fair or a booth. We also hang out at almost every Ann Arbor Summer Festival. You'll see us in the Hands-On Museum there too. And like I mentioned, we typically will have these animals involved in our educational programs. Not all of them, but a lot of times people can also customize, and if they have a certain animal they want to meet or want to focus on, we can tend to that request and make that happen as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let me ask you briefly, do you have any, we talked about animals that you don't house, that you don't have, but what is it that you may need that the public may not know that you
That's a great question.
Like, what is, give me a need.
So many of the things that we usually need, it's funny to hear about, is stuff for grocery shopping. So we actually get a lot of vegetables and fruit for both our reptiles, but also for our bats. So one of the things that we use a lot are either gift cards to certain grocery stores, or sometimes what I'll do is I'll just bring a papaya in for the day, and then I know that it'll be utilized. A lot of times too, though, one of the big things we need is actually volunteers, just people themselves. It takes a lot of work to care for these animals, and we have a great team, but we always can use extra hands. And so probably the biggest thing that we always ask for people to do is just come on over, visit, find an interest in these guys, and see if there are ways that you can play a part in their care.
Aw, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's good.
What a fantastic place and program that you have.
I love my job. I can't deny it.
That's wonderful. You can tell. I can definitely tell.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for for coming on and bringing all of them.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
Yeah, great show. Great show. Thank you so much.
Of course.
And again, that is it for this episode of Happy Tales. For more programming from CTN, you can visit us at a2gov.org/CTN, or talk to us always on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at #CTN Ann Arbor. And again, thanks for watching this episode of Happy Tales.